last video that I posted called The Power of the Smile, I made an announcement at the end of that video that said that I would be launching a video series called Build Your Life. Well, shortly after I posted that video, I realized that it was summer and we had so many things that were happening, and I realized, boy, that was really bad timing of me to think that I could actually do that along with everything else. So I made a decision to postpone that video series. I want to let you know that it is going to happen, but it's on hold for now. So suffice it to say, Build Your Life will happen. I haven't figured out the timing of that. I'm working on my book, and for now, that's what I have to say. So today's video is on the topic of anger. You know, anger, I have to be really honest, anger is something that has plagued me my whole life. We all have our things that we need to work on, and we all have things that are strongholds in our life, and anger has been one of the strongholds in my life. But I am happy to say that in the past 5 years, I have really seriously dealt with my anger and worked on it. I have made some incredible breakthroughs, and so much so that I feel like my life has changed. So the first question I want to ask you is, are you angry? Is there a part of you that lives, that battles anger? Is anger your default for when you're triggered? And how is your anger showing up? And if you're not an angry person, do you have someone in your life that is? Do you know someone that you can share this video with that could benefit from having some tools to deal with anger? Anger sometimes feels shameful. Nobody wants to admit their anger because for me, it made me feel like I was weak. And my ego didn't want to admit that I was an angry person. There are other reasons I didn't want to admit my anger, but more than anything, I really used anger to get my needs met. So let's start out by asking the question, what is anger? One of the definitions that resonated with me that I read in a book by Les Carter called The Anger Trap said that anger is the emotion of self-preservation. Another definition for anger is that it's a response to stimuli. What people say could trigger us. It's a response to perhaps our surroundings. It could be a perceived threat or an invalidation of who we are that could trigger an anger response. For me, it was about my inner child. It was the unhealed past in me that caused me to lash out in anger. Underneath anger lives the true emotion. We cover up our emotions and our feelings with anger as a self-preservation coping mechanism. The positive thing that I've learned about anger is that for me, anger was always a clue that something wasn't right. Anger didn't work for me because I didn't know how to mine deeper for the jewels that resided beneath the anger. But it was always a loud voice calling out to me to tell me that something wasn't right. So if you're angry and you're lashing out in anger, let that be a message to you that something isn't right, and there's something deeper within you that is calling out to you to get those unmet needs met. Let it be a voice of sorts, and I'll dive into that later in more detail. The most important thing to remember about anger is that everyone has anger. What really matters about anger is how we use it. Emotions such as fear, hurt, pain, hurt feelings, abandonment, rejection, betrayal, our unhealed wounds, our old pain points, even words that people say to us and looks that people give us can trigger our anger. We can be angry because we're self-righteous, and that was one of the things in my life that I had to admit and I realized is that I had a very self-righteous anger. The other thing that can trigger anger is that we feel disconnected or powerless, a sense of powerlessness, maybe a lack of control. We might feel a lack of safety and security. That was another thing for me that triggered my anger. Safety and security is something that I seek and I need as a woman, and I don't have to feel embarrassed anymore about admitting that, because it's something that all women need and really all people need. And if those needs aren't being met, we're going to express that in some way or another. Also, unforgiveness. If we have someone in our life that we haven't forgiven and we're maybe holding grudges and we're withholding our love, or we have unresolved conflict, maybe some just bad baggage there, that can cause anger. It's like a festering wound. Also, a lack of self-love can cause anger. We all need to learn how to love ourselves so that we can love others. And if we have not worked on our own love and acceptance of ourselves, we can still harbor that anger inside. My anger started as a very young child. I was angry because my mom was angry, and I'm not blaming my mom. I'm just saying that I learned anger as a child from my mom. All I knew is that my mom wasn't happy. My mom was moody. She was angry, and she wore her anger on her sleeve. She used her anger as her power. And I did the same thing. Her anger was modeled to me, and her anger was, I was a codependent child, and so I assumed a lot of my mom's emotions, and I also assumed responsibility for my mom's unhappiness, and that made me angry. At my core, I was very hurt because as a child, I didn't understand what was happening with my mom. Later in life, as an adult, I found out and I got a lot of answers, and I had extreme compassion for her. And as I make this video and talk about my mom, my mom is in heaven. She passed away in 2007. And I have healed my mother wound. And I know that my mother would want me to use our tough battles, our scars, our wounds as an opportunity to help other people. If my mom and I had lived in an era as young people with videos at our disposal, and if those were times of our lives when people were talking about these things openly, we may have not had to suffer for so many years loving each other so much, but not understanding what was happening between us. And that's one reason why it's so important for me to make these videos and share this information so that other people don't have to live their lives for so long in misery and in anger. But underneath the anger, there's always a deeper emotion. And as I also said before as well, I don't see anger as all bad. I want you to remember throughout this video that I believe that anger can serve a purpose, which can point to a treasure, a buried treasure within us, which is our true emotions. I want to ask you if you know the reasons for your anger. If you do, that's really great. If you don't, then I hope to be able to help you understand throughout this video what they are. My kind of anger was a warrior anger. There are two ways that anger shows up. Usually you become a warrior or you become a victim. A warrior fights. A warrior is not afraid of conflict. A warrior is a kind of resentful anger. It's like an F-you anger, a get away from me, don't screw with me anger. It's a very hard armor that I had around me. I was very self-righteous and ego-driven. It was a leave me alone anger. The way that my friend Kat described it was that I was like a bird with a broken wing, and I was wounded. And anybody who came along and triggered me or hurt me, it was like as if they were stepping on my broken wing. A victim, on the other hand, is angry inside, but they blame themselves more than they blame other people, and they feel sorry for themselves. And they hide out and they become like sad sack and depressed and sad and passive aggressive. And so they experience their anger and they show their anger in a different way, like a more non-confrontational, poor me kind of anger. So are you able to identify whether you have a warrior anger or a victim anger? I have this quote that I made up, and it's this: anger is madness. And of course, that's a double entendre. Anger is madness. When I'm angry, I'm mad. But my anger had come to a point where it was madness in my life. I was becoming a mad woman. I was not my best self, and it was becoming my default. Instead of being able to pause and access what was really happening, I had this attitude like nobody gets it. Well, I ask myself now, like, what did I think they didn't get? Was it me they didn't get? I was accusatory, that they were clueless and I wasn't, that I was right and they weren't. I went through this period of time when my anger was at its worst, and that's when I was in an abusive marriage. And of course my anger I had to suppress my anger because I was with an angrier person. So I was extremely on guard and very suppressed. And it was probably at the height of my anger, but it was a suppressed anger. And what happened was that just turned into this internal hatred. I was blaming the world for my pain. And you know what? I didn't know any of this then. And I was a hurt woman. I was a very hurt, wounded woman. And I didn't know what to do with my anger. And it's who I was then. It's not who I am now. But it's the truth of that time of my life. I cursed life. I spent a lot of time isolating myself. I was drinking a lot, very heavily, to numb this pain inside of me. The anger was like a poison inside of me. Like it was like a wild animal, like an untamed animal. And its roar became louder and louder and louder. And this animal came to feast on me on a regular basis. And I fed my anger with words and thoughts and doing things that were unhealthy and numbing, and it was just a really bad time of my life. So I was seeing my anger changing. I was seeing it increasing. It was growing. It was speaking to me in a louder voice than ever, and it was trying to get my attention. I didn't know that then. And that's what I mean by the good part of anger. And what you want to keep in mind is that if your anger is growing, it's giving you clues that you really need to pay attention to what's happening inside of you. Don't give way to the anger, and I'll tell you how not to do that in this video. So what is your anger saying? What is it? What are the words that are coming out of your mouth? What is the overflow of your heart trying to tell you? Is it ego-driven? Is it all about you? Are you accusing people of being stupid idiots and you knowing it all? Are you blaming people for your problems? Are you blaming everyone for everything? These are just questions I'm asking, not to make you feel bad about yourself and not to make you feel guilty. These are the questions I needed to be asking and the questions that I did start asking myself. I did not admit I was angry, and I didn't realize that I was controlled by my anger until about 5 years ago, honestly. It was a 4th of July weekend, and I was at the beach with the man that I was in a fairly new relationship with. And since I have decided as a life coach that I am going to be completely honest about my life in every way, I want to tell you that the story I am about to tell is about me and who is now my husband. I was dating my husband at that time, and I had very unreasonable expectations of him. So from the standpoint of having unreasonable expectations, I expected my husband to read my mind and to know my thoughts and to know exactly what he was supposed to do. And when he disappointed me, that's when my anger came out. Most of my anger was fear-based, and they were old patterns of behavior that I had learned in my childhood. I took my husband's actions personally, the things he did or the things he didn't do, I took personally as like thinking he didn't understand me or thinking he didn't love me. I saw his inability to meet my needs as a weakness, and I blamed him for not meeting my needs in the way that I wanted him to according to my high expectations. I wasn't ever able to express my needs from the standpoint of my hurt and pain. So I was speaking to him, my anger was speaking so loudly to him that he couldn't hear what I was saying. Essentially what happened was something happened one night when we were having dinner, and I got very angry and I took it out on him. And after dinner, I left the house and I walked on the beach for a long time, and I stayed away for hours. And I walked on the beach and I went into town and I bought some wine, and I basically essentially stewed in my anger and cursed him and the world for about 2 or 3 hours. I was in this state of just total unreasonableness, and I reflected on how bad he was then. I was processing all of this anger, and I don't know that if I ever really thought about the things that I was doing that was contributing to the fact that my needs weren't being met. And I don't know if I said a prayer. I was certainly a Christian then, and I was certainly having a relationship with God. But I also learned that a lot of times my anger was such that it prevented me even from accessing, it masked my love of Christ. It just had such a tremendous hold on me. So that's kind of that story. It got late, and I went back home in the evening, and my husband was sitting on the deck. I felt bad. You know, I felt so bad. I felt so guilty. I felt so bad about myself. It was a really bad weekend, and the anger had finally reached a point where I was able to see it for what it was, and it had reached a point where I was not blaming everyone else for it anymore. I actually saw that this was an issue that I really needed to deal with. There's a saying in the Bible that says, to everything there is a season. And I believe that this was the beginning of when anger was starting to get ready to leave me. It was the way that I coped, And as a child, we need our voices and our anger to scream, and to our loud voices to protect ourselves sometimes. And for many people, there does come a time, and I hope that's you, when our anger is ready to leave. And, it's contained inside of us too long. There comes a time when we need to say goodbye to it. For me, I had come to a place where I think I was developing my spirituality, my relationship with God was growing, and I was ready to become a better person. So I thought about this weekend after we had returned very deeply and prayerfully. And I called my boyfriend at that time, my husband now, and asked him if I could come and talk to him. And I went over there and I apologized. I owned what I had done that weekend, and I admitted to him my anger. I told him my anger story. And he understood me more. And that's a key piece, a key step, that when you start to see your anger and you realize you need to do something about it, and you humble yourself, that you go to that person that you have hurt by being so angry, and you admit your anger, and you ask for their forgiveness, and you ask them if they'll give you another chance. And that's what I did. And he said yes. He loved me, and he wanted to give me another chance because he was hopeful about our relationship. And so that was really my beginning, the beginning for me. So I went up, I watched people being prayed over for a while, and I got my guts up, and I decided that I was going to go up and have prayer. There was a girl named Christy, and she asked me for permission to put her hand on my abdomen, and I gave her permission. And she said that she sensed a mass in my abdomen. And there was another girl there called Shannon, and so Christy told me that the mass, she sensed like there were tentacles coming out of this mass. And she said that the mass was fear. So she completely nailed my anger, which was almost always fear and hurt. And so they were praying for me. And then after they finished the prayer, the pastor came up to me and he put his hand on my forehead, and it wasn't anything dramatic or anything. He just put his hand on my forehead and he started praying for me. And when he was praying for me, I could feel physically this sensation, like this energy of something drawing out of my forehead. I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea what the sensation was, but it truly was like this energy, or this like almost like threads being pulled out of, like almost a ball of yarn unwinding or something like that. And then he walked away after he finished the prayer, and that was it. And both of the women that had been praying for me, they said that they completely understood anger. That one of the women said that she had lived with anger a long time in her life, and that she knew that my anger was finished, that I didn't have to live that way anymore, and she was confident that it was over. So I left church that day and I went home, and I journaled that I felt a much lighter sense of myself, and that I didn't feel any tenseness or anything in my torso anymore. Like that was gone. And I started journaling and reflecting back upon what happened at church that day. And I'm going to tell you about another miracle. As I remember, I was completely overwhelmed and overcome by what had just taken place at church. And so I was thinking about everything, and I was journaling about it. And what happened was another miracle. I call it a miracle. It's nothing but a miracle. What happened was I was given a vision by God. And the vision was me standing on a street in public. And what I saw was me with the front of me stripped away. It wasn't like I was standing there naked, but what it was this me standing there, and all I could see was red. So I knew that my skin had been stripped away. And I knew that what I was seeing was just my blood, like blood. It was just me standing in public with the front of me stripped away, and I could just see this red. And I was thinking about, I felt very vulnerable, and I felt very lost, and like I didn't know what this was about, and I was scared. And not like just this sense of what's next kind of thing. And then I heard the voice of God, and he said, "You were wearing the wrong armor." And it gives me chills to this day, because those were that was the words I heard that were spoken to me. You were wearing the wrong armor. And I completely understood what was happening. God had stripped the anger away from me. And he was showing me that I had used anger as my armor and protection all this time. To this day, I get emotional when I think about it, because that's the day my life changed. It was the next layer of this anger being taken away. And I understood it very clearly at that moment. But God let me sit with that question mark in my mind just long enough to be able to process it and understand it. And I remember asking questions like, what now? What's going to happen now? If I don't have my anger, what will I have? What is the right armor? What is my armor? I wasn't asking these questions verbally. It was all the stuff that was happening inside of me, like this conversation, this processing of this information. Like what happens in a dream. It was exactly like a dream in real life. It's exactly what it was, but it was really happening in real time. I was crying, and it was like a revelation. So the next thing that happened was that I was weeping and mourning the loss of the anger. I was weeping and mourning what God had taken away, which is why I finally was able to realize that anger was sort of like a friend that I was saying goodbye to. It was like a bad friend. And I was literally weeping and mourning the loss of this anger, the relationship that was being taken away. And that's truly what it felt like. It had been my safety, what I had used as my safety and my security. And it had been what I had clung to for so long as my validation of my pain. That was the end of the vision. And the next thing that happened, and I don't remember if it was that day as well or if it was shortly after that, I was led to the scripture in Ephesians 6:10-18, called the full armor of God. Imagine what it must have felt like to have been taken full circle And so now what was happening is that God was giving me my new armor. I couldn't have thought this up with my own brain. And these are the ways that God works in my life. So now he was giving me my new armor. And that's the armor of God. And I'm going to read this scripture to you. And it says, "Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes with the gospel of peace. In addition to all of this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people." That was my new armor. And so every day for the next several months after that, I prayed and I put on the full armor of God every single morning. In the shower, after the shower, I was praying that scripture. I framed it, I put it in my bathroom, and that was how I began my day. Was my anger healed? No. It was and it wasn't. We all have anger in us, I believe forever, but it no longer completely dominated me. But now came the work. I started to understand anger. I hadn't personalized it yet. I was opening myself up to the healing. I was willing to take a look at it, but it was coming off layer by layer. Like I said, the first layer was that God took that first layer, which was the armor, that hard shell, that was taken away. The thing that I wrote that I'm going to include in my book says, when we learn to overcome anger, we are like little children learning how to behave for the first time. And that's exactly what it was for me. And there are days when I still resort to my inner child, that little girl that was wounded and is still being healed on a healing journey until I die, because that's what life is about. Life is about learning and growing and becoming. And it's a really beautiful thing. So I was relearning, I was watching videos, I was praying, I was putting on the full armor of God every day, and I was meditating, and I was listening to a lot of guided meditations. And one of the people that I listened to, and I want to tell you about her name is Belle Ruth Naparstek. It's a very strange name, but she is like the queen, like the goddess of guided meditation. She knows a lot about PTSD, which I had as a result of my first marriage was extremely verbally abusive. Look her up on YouTube. She has CDs, she has, I don't know if she has books, but you can access her guided meditations. They're some of the best out there. Some of the other tools I used as I was writing anger letters, I was writing forgiveness letters. I didn't send any of those letters, but it helped me process my anger. And I was opening the door to self-love for the first time in my life. And I was beginning to shift out of my anger. Then, several years later, I got married to this man I was telling you about earlier. And I have a confession to make. That was when my anger really was triggered again. And that's when I had to go much deeper into my anger recovery. I married my husband. He had 2 children. And I went into a zone of feeling, it was so new to me. I mean, I had never had my own children. I was married again after having been single for 10 years, and I wasn't ready. And I thought I was, and we did everything we could to prepare for this, blended family situation. And we are navigating through a lot of changes and a lot of things that are causing us to be better people. So suffice it to say, I saw my anger again, and I really had to take it to a deeper level. I started to see my anger as a form of self-abuse. I realized that when I was angry at people, I was lashing out, but the way I lashed out is in isolation, not talking to my husband sometimes, internalizing it, beating myself up, hiding out in my bed, my office, my safe place, punishing him, just old, ugly ways of being, not accessing the emotion that was happening inside of me and being able to convey that to him. And so this is where it gets really good, because this is where I had to get extremely honest with myself about my anger. And I admitted that my anger, when I was using my anger to protect me again, I realized that I was actually enjoying being angry. It made me feel good sometimes because it was such a self-righteous anger, and it kept that self-righteousness alive. Again, I was using it as my armor, and I also felt entitled in my anger, and my anger was a weapon that I used that I thought gave me power, but it didn't. Sometimes my anger showed them their ways. It was my way of showing them and what they were doing to me. And although it didn't, it only showed them how weak I was and how angry I was. And the other thing that anger did for me is that it gave me a false sense of control. I was feeling so out of control, like so disempowered, that I was clinging to any sense of control that I could get, and so that was coming out in anger. So then I was again thinking about the fact that anger, had a hold on me, and that it was a relationship I was having, again, an unhealthy relationship with anger. And I really felt alone in it, and I felt that I had regressed, but it wasn't really a regression. It was more like a deeper level of the anger that needed to be healed. And so I started surrendering to it. And I had to dig really deep, because a big part of me thought that if I surrendered my anger, that I was giving in to them and they were going to get their way, and then what would I have? So I read this book called The Anger Trap, and it is phenomenal. Before that, in my earlier overcoming anger work, I read a book called The Gift of Anger, and I recommend those 2 books, but The Anger Trap is written by Les Carter, and it is a fantastic book. It reached me. It spoke in a way that reached me. I learned that I didn't learn from this book but I learned on my own processing of anger. Anger was my pseudo power. I used it to get my needs met and to protect my heart, my broken heart from previous relationships and the unhealed relationships in my past. But honestly, my anger didn't protect my heart, and it only blocked my feelings and my emotions. So the way that I started accessing my true feelings is that I started connecting to my heart. When I was in extreme anger, I would leave and I would go on a walk, or I would just remove myself from the situation, and I would literally connect to my heart. And I would ask myself what are the things that you're really feeling? I would try to break the barrier of the anger, break through the barrier. And I would begin to access in my heart the feelings and the emotions that were trying to come out. And it was an incredible thing. Like, I really literally asked my heart to help me understand it. And so then my feelings started surfacing. And I started to cry then. I started to process my hurt and my pain. And the most miraculous thing is that I actually started to feel my feelings. I had been so shut down. I had been so guarded that I wasn't feeling my true feelings for a long time. And I began to soften, and I started to feel like a normal person, and I started to feel alive, and it was just incredible. I started to feel more free, and actually what I learned is that without the anger, I felt more safe and secure. And I learned that, and also, I felt more self-loving and more complete and nurtured. I was able to start expressing my emotions and my feelings, and my walls were coming down, and the door to my heart started opening. So the truth about anger is that our anger masks our feelings. It masks the emotions that need to come out of our heart, and it prevents us from accessing our emotions that need to be heard and understood. Again, I believe that the anger is the loud voice. It's the loud emotion that's trying to get our attention, to tell us that we need to pay attention to something, an unmet need inside of us. So listen to your anger as a voice that's giving you a clue. Start to think about anger as like a chime that you need to pay attention to your inside, your inner wisdom, and your inner voice. Tune in and understand that anger is a stronghold that wants to keep you imprisoned. It really is. It was the stronghold in my life. And I now refer to a scripture which is in Proverbs 27 that says, "Now the Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" It speaks so perfectly to the need I have for a stronghold that gives me courage and strength and safety and security. And that is my God. And anger never did that for me, especially as an adult. I learned that anger was the war that I waged on myself. It consumed me, and the truth started to become clearer and clearer than the lies that anger told me. The other huge breakthrough I had, and this is a big one because anger is very stubborn, I realized that if I could surrender anger, that I wasn't giving anything up. I wasn't giving in to them and letting them get their way. I realized that I was actually getting the thing I wanted all along. It was the thing deep inside my heart that the pain and the hurt and the fear needed. And that was peace and serenity and safety and security and love and freedom. Those were the things that I would get if I surrendered anger. It wasn't me giving up my power. That's what I finally learned. That was when the magic began. Surrendering my anger, it wasn't me giving up my power. It was me getting all the things that I wanted to get by using anger. But anger never got me those things. I realized that being able to access the feelings and emotions inside of me was a radical act of self-love, and really the thing that caused the anger to diminish. And I learned this, and this was a recent revelation. I learned that love is way more powerful than anger. Love conquers anger. Love overpowers anger. Anger doesn't want you to believe that. So I wasn't mad at anger anymore because I understood it now. I didn't have to regret my anger. I didn't have to beat myself up anymore for being angry. I could now see that anger was something that taught me a lot about myself. It was my way of getting validation and self-protection. It was my way of being in the world, and it was my way of being able to have a voice for a while. I thank anger for that. And I also thank anger today because I believe that it was the voice of love trying to express itself in the only way it knew how, which was loudly, because I wasn't paying attention. I was not listening to my inner wisdom and my inner voice. I don't know if you're going to be able to make sense of this because it seems like I'm referring to anger as two different things, and it is. In one way, anger is loud and it overshadows the tender, soft voice inside of us that's trying to be heard. But in another way, it's a clue and a warning that you do need to tune in. So anger got loud enough for me that I had to listen to it. I wrote, the anger was the part of me that knew what was right. I needed love, and I was worthy of love. And so the anger persisted until I finally woke up to what was truly needed and what was really inside me longing to be expressed. And that's what was needed. So in our anger, we do this thing called feeding the wolf. I don't know if you've ever heard of the legend of the wolf, but there's a story told of a boy who was angry and upset, and he went to his grandfather for advice, and the grandfather told him that he had two wolves inside of him and inside of his heart. And one of them was a kind and understanding wolf that lived in harmony and peace, and the other one was vengeful and cruel, and it raged, but it changed nothing. And the two wolves fight inside of him, and to see which one is more powerful. And the boy asked his grandfather which wolf would win the battle, would win the fight. And the grandfather responded, "The one I feed." And that little legend was very helpful to me as a tool in realizing that this anger inside of me was very much a wolf, and that the ways I fed this wolf and kept it alive was my internal grumbling and my negative thoughts, my critical thoughts, and my self-defensiveness and my self-righteousness, and the person that I punished, which was me. My anger for a long time kept me from being a happy, loving person. And so I began to do this thing called Starving the Wolf, where I would think of anger as a wolf, and every time my negative, self-critical thoughts, or just critical thoughts, every time I would be in that kind of behavior or catch myself in that pattern of thinking, I would shift out of it by acknowledging the wolf, and I would say, "I see you, wolf. I know that you're at my doorstep. I'm not opening the door to you, and I'm no longer feeding you. You're going to have to find someone else to feed to get food from. So I bid you farewell. I send you on your way," because remember, we had a relationship with anger, so we need to bid it farewell and give it permission to leave. "I give you permission to leave." And so I would imagine the wolf turning around and leaving and going to another house to get fed. There were days, though, when the wolf didn't want to leave because I was angry at something or myself. And I would see this wolf sitting under a tree in my yard, in my head, and just waiting. And it was a really powerful tool that I used because I waited that wolf out. And I said, I would just talk and do this dialogue of, "I see you, and I'm sorry that you feel that you need to be here and you can't find food anywhere else, but I'm not opening this door because I no longer feed you anymore." And I would put a smile on my face, and I would delight in starving the wolf. This thing happened where the wolf started coming around less and less and less. And when it came around, it was weaker and weaker. And it's kind of weird the way I'm describing this, because it was almost like a real thing that happened, and it was in my head. It was a tool that was very useful, and I started seeing the wolf as emaciated and weak and pathetic, frankly. And I started to have compassion on the wolf. I started to feel sorry for it. Not in a way that I was willing to give into, but I started to have compassion on the anger in a way that I could befriend it and release it from me at a deeper level. And so I was just further releasing and giving it permission to leave and telling it, "I'm sorry, you must go. And, I'm okay with being without you, and I'm a happy person, and you have my permission to go, and I release you." And oh my gosh, I highly recommend that process. I was saying goodbye to my relationship with anger, and I was a new me. So I want to summarize this video by saying that anger does deceive us. It makes us believe it's our power, and it's not. We use anger as a false armor to cover our pain and our fear and our hurt and our true emotion. Anger, to me, it was self-abuse. It was something that I inflicted upon myself as much as I inflicted it upon those around me and those I loved the most. It made me feel powerful because it was a very self-righteous state of being. It was a barricade to my feelings, and it blocked out my true emotion that I had a right to feel. It alienated me. Nobody ever understood my anger. Nobody wanted to be around it, and nobody wanted it. So I was alone in it. Anger is a facade. It's a fortress of self-isolation. It prevented me from developing deep, loving relationships, especially with myself. Anger is a very lonely place. Anger is self-destructive, and we serve anger like it's our God, and it becomes our pseudo-God. I learned that vulnerability was my true strength, that vulnerability is where love lives, and our real power comes in being able to communicate our true, most vulnerable, and deep feelings and emotions. Anger seized my heart and took it hostage for many, many years. It was like a prison cell that I lived in, and it didn't help me, and until I understood how it could help me. And to me, for a long time, it was like a toxic waste dump. So I want you to start thinking about anger from this frame of mind, that nobody's hurting you from the outside. Yes, hurt is happening and pain is happening, but you can get healed and you can get those needs met by tuning in, acknowledging the true emotion, the true feelings, and then expressing those feelings, allowing those feelings, and loving yourself enough to heal those unmet needs, to heal those wounds, and to be able to talk to the people around you that you love the most about the things in your heart that you've kept from them. Then they'll understand you, and there will be true connection, and then you can decide from a rational, mature, healed place if that relationship is right for you or not. Acknowledge your anger, confess it, admit it, confess it to God, connect to your true feelings, which live in your heart. Seek the feelings that are beneath the anger. Give your anger permission to leave. Open the door to something new, which is your true feelings. Pray. Feel the anger in your physiology. Where does your anger live? Get familiar with it. Is your heart beating out of your chest as the adrenaline flows in your anger? Do you feel scared? Is your heart flopping around in is your heart flopping around from the hurt and pain inside of it? Do you get headaches? Wherever that anger lives, tune into that. And then when you're trying to access your feelings and emotion, tune into that place. It's usually the heart. In your anger, don't focus on them, but focus on you. Focus on loving yourself, focus on your needs and accessing the truth inside of you. And allow the anger to show you the suppressed wisdom of the heart, and turn your attention to a worthy place, which is inside of you, and listen very closely and intently and honor the voice inside. and use your anger for your good. What do you need to do differently now? What is the armor that you can put on that's not anger? I highly recommend the 2 books that I mentioned, especially The Anger Trap. I mentioned earlier the anger letters. You write an anger letter, you just write it out and you don't edit it. You just let your feelings flow. And you don't edit it and you don't send it, but it's just an expression of the anger, and then you read it out loud. Because it may be that this is the first time in your life you've ever expressed your anger and been able to hear it from the place of your heart. And it's very, very healing. Create a mantra that you can believe, and mine is, I can get my needs met through kindness and a calm tone. Increase your faith and decrease your fight, and ask God for help with that. Forgive yourself, and when you don't do it right and you default to anger, reconnect, restart. This overcoming anger, it's not a destination, it's a journey. And keep that in mind, because it's a daily practice. I'm not over it. I'm still practicing, and I probably will until I die. I'm gonna share and close with this quote that was extremely helpful. I wrote it down, I put it in my wallet, I put it on mirror, I taped it up everywhere, I put it in my car. This is very helpful. A quote by Viktor Frankl, who was a concentration camp survivor, says, "In between stimulus and response," and the anger is stimulus, the anger is the response, the stimulus is what's happening outside of us that's triggering the anger. In between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is the power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. And that quote was life-changing for me. It was another tool I used to overcome my anger. So practice self-love. Watch this video as many times as you need. Drop your questions below. Drop your comments below. Tell me how your practice is going. And watch for your heart to open. You're gonna start softening. You're gonna start feeling your feelings. You're gonna start healing. And I am here for you. If you want a coach to help you with your anger, I am available. You can look at my website, LoriKaiserLifeCoach.com. If you want to just have a conversation for 30 minutes, I offer that, no charge. I want to help people. But I know that if you implement, listen to this story, believe it, and start to make some choices to overcome your anger, life is so much better. Life feels better. I feel so much better. When I'm tuning into my feelings and I feel hurt and I feel pain and the tears flow and I feel my feelings, it's a cleansing, healing process. It feels so much better than anger. I feel human. And I am going to be praying that everyone that listens to this teaching has the same experience. I wish you the very best, and until we talk again, much love to you. Thank you for watching.